rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebesta. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tages. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Maybe you found us online. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, click subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30, 40 plus years, then shutting it off randomly on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement habits. Healthy habits are important at any time in your life, but especially in retirement. Time is one of your greatest assets if you are a retiree, but if you have bad habits, that time is going to work against you. Today, we cover the habit of movement, moving your body. Your body was created to move. Furthermore, the act of retirement can have a more detrimental effect on your physical health than actually getting older. In this podcast, Ben talks about how to engineer movement into your schedule and make it impactful rather than just going to the gym. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, we're back and we're continuing this series on retirement habits. And we've got a great show on tap here today. We're going to talk about the habit of movement and activity. This is going to be a great show. It's really important. A little bit of a curveball from some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past several shows, but this is going to be a great show. So we are so glad that you are here. Before we get started, just a reminder, we have a Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Look for more tips on living repurposed, special content, Q&A, Facebook Lives. Just go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement to join this growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Ben Tages joins me on the show. And Ben, we started this series a couple of weeks ago, and we started it with the heart of gratitude, or having a heart of gratitude. That's kind of where it all begins. And again, I think that was a great start to this series because, again, if your heart is in the wrong place, trying to do God's will and walk into His fullness is going to be tough.
Yeah, that came about right around Thanksgiving. We were doing that, and I can just remember thinking, man, we've got a lot to be thankful for. And that was a convicting show for me. I have a tendency to sometimes get overwhelmed with things going on around me. And I think for many of us, if we can all just stop and say, okay, let's look at the positives. If I can have a habit of gratitude in my life, it's so impactful.
Yeah, I think the word habit there is the big one, creating a habit. And I fall into that trap too. I tend to default to maybe a little bit being less joyful and less thankful. So to have that habit built into your day and your life, that's huge. We talked about positive self-talk. We talked about how sometimes the most negative words, the most hurtful words that we get often are from ourselves. That was a big show as well.
Yeah, sometimes as we were talking about that, even as I've talked to listeners since then about it, it's not like this. We're lighting candles, and sometimes people hear positive self-talk as this new agey thing. It's nothing like that, but it is knowing even in God's word, He tells us very specifically, think about such things. Right? We talked about how He wants us to be thinking about things that are healthy for us, that are healthy for those around us, that keep us from getting down a negative track. So again, we know that it's not a new age idea. It is something that goes way back to God's word and how He knows what's best for us, and positive self-talk and saying, you know what, God, you've made me a certain way. I am how I am, right. And by really just reinforcing and reassuring ourselves that we're doing our best, I think there is very much something to that. So I'd encourage people to go back and listen to that episode.
Having a sound mind, taking every thought captive, being renewed by the Spirit, all in God's Word. And again, that's what we talked about in that show. Last week, we talked about the habit of reflecting and the importance of journaling. That was a huge one as well, and that can be a really integral part to a retiree's life, and a really important part as well.
Yeah, I've gotten away from journaling a little bit in the last few months, certainly, and I'm trying to get back on that based on that. And I got to tell you, when you can write things down, I mean, you can have all kinds of experiences in life, but until you write them down and sit and just reflect on them, they don't do you a lot of good, right? We can learn so much more by stopping, taking a break, writing that down, and at least reflecting on what happened in your day. And by the way, when you're doing that towards the end of the day, it kind of sets you up for the next day again.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Again, imagine what if you spent each day or each night before bed having gratitude and then reflecting on the experiences of that day. Because like you said, those experiences are just experiences, but if you reflect upon them, then that's where they become kind of a tool to see kind of how God is working in your life. If you missed any of those shows, we highly encourage you go back, check them out. If you haven't subscribed on iTunes, make sure that you do that. But we've had some really, really killer shows here lately, so we recommend you head back and listen to all those shows. Great content there for you. So today we're going to talk about the habit of movement. And this one, when we started this series, I knew we were going to do a show on this and turn more towards kind of the physical side, because you can't ignore this aspect of retirement. You can't ignore this aspect of being repurposed. It's an important piece, so we have to kind of go there.
Yeah, we do, Jared. And I think right off the bat, I mean, as we start talking about health, we start talking about, people's bodies specifically, and as they're aging. I just want to remind listeners, I'm not a doctor. You're not a doctor. In fact, I struggle with this is the exact stuff we're talking about today, much like many of our episodes. The difference is I feel like I'm an expert in those areas. This is something specifically that we see in retirees. These are my observations dealing with thousands of retirees over the years, not a medical professional's opinion. But I do think that if you can take what we're learning today, or what we're showing you today, and apply it to your life, you can be your health can improve so much.
Well, I think you, Ben, probably were awakened to this idea of how important physical health is, not because you have a degree in physiology, which you don't, but it really comes down to your experiences with retirees and working with them over the course of 20 years. And you had a specific encounter with a client, and that really kind of opened your eyes to this.
Yeah, it was shortly after I wrote the book, Repurposed, and we were going through some of the details in the book with the client. I was so excited, and then we were talking about the next step, which is the workbook, Repurposed You, and walking them through that. And I was so excited, and they both, at some point during our conversation, she stopped me and she said, Ben, all these things you're talking about the travel and the excitement of spending time with my grandchildren and all these other things you're talking about and living with purpose would all be great if I could walk. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the look on her face, because she was like, Ben, we haven't, we can't, our bodies aren't to the point where we can even do a lot of the stuff you're talking about. So I think it was a wake-up call for me saying, no, we have to implement more of that health and positive, just taking care of our bodies earlier in our messaging. And for people that are in there, doesn't matter what stage of life you're at, this message for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Repurpose University, which again, we mention this on the show often. Go to our website, retirerepurpose.com. You can see a preview for what that looks like. It's a 5-lesson class taught by Ben and myself, and a lot of churches in the area take this. There's ways that you can take it online, so I encourage you to go check that out. But the physical aspect of your life in retirement is one of the 5 major lessons of Repurposed University. And here's the truth, whether you like it or not, when you get older, in fact, once you cross about, what I've seen in different studies, once you cross about 27 to 35 years old, whether you like it or not, your body is going to head into kind of it's going to start to decline, all right? And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody, but at the end of the day, if you're over the age of 30 and you don't do anything differently, all things stay the same, your body is going to be less healthy in 1 year, it's going to be less healthy in 5 years, and it's certainly going to be less healthy in 10 years than what it is right now. And that's something that a lot of people, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Well, you're offending me, Jared.
You're not over 27.
I mean, I'm well over my mid 20s, and I know that. There's so many times where I can think about things I could have done, in my 20s, and the way I could have eaten, what I could have done for exercise. Now I'm like, yeah, I got to make some changes. So that's definitely something that certainly, regardless of your age, you're going to see that. So I think our body, like you said, naturally we're declining. We know that anything good is upstream. If you want to think about like a river, rivers are washing downhill, right? Our bodies are kind of like that, right? It takes extra effort and work to push upstream, but that's really has to be your mentality as you age. Is like, no, I can't just do what I did last year because it's not enough. I've got to increase what I'm doing, and just continuing with status quo won't be enough.
Well, again, I think it's getting in alignment with how our bodies were created. And again, we can't stop the aging process. Again, it's going to happen. So I think the point with this show is not to give you some tips on how to become an Olympic athlete or get into CrossFit. That's not the point. The point is just slow down as much as we can, humanly possible, to slow down that natural decline in health so we can have the best health for as long as we can, so we can have the most impact while on planet Earth. I think that is kind of the main point of today's show. And that leads us into our first point. Our first point here today is your body was created to move. Ben, talk about that.
Well, I think, Jared, this comes back to something I've said many times on this show. The act of retirement is more detrimental to your physical health than actually aging. I'll say that again. It has more to do with when you stop working than just getting older. They happen to happen usually at about the same time. But one piece of that, there's mental stuff. There's all this other things we've talked about. But part of that is our physical health, right? I mean, our physical health and our physical well-being from what we're doing in the workplace. Even if you think you have a very sedentary job, right, you will do less activity if you are not careful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, once that train starts to kind of come to a slowdown or a stop, it's much harder to kind of get it going. But I think you bring up a couple of good points. First of all, whether you had an active job or not, don't underestimate how much activity it gets you. At the very least, it would get you out of bed and get you moving and get you to the car and get you to the office, even if you got to the office and you sat there. But you take that away, that's some activity that it is accounted for.
Yeah, we talk about guardrails all the time on this show. And guardrails, like you think about, you're going up a winding road, going up a mountain. There's guardrails there that keep you kind of focused on what's for. It keeps you, kind of keeps you in line with your path. Well, part of a guardrail that you had with work was that it did create structure around your life that specifically gets you to work. Like you said, it allowed us to create structure. And one of the guardrails with health is, it made us get up and move. Yep. And it made our day look a certain way. So I can remember one of the stories that I've told so many times, Jared, from the book Repurposed, was a story about Jim. In fact, that whole story, the whole book came from my interactions with Jim early on in my career. And one of the things that we didn't recognize when we told Jim to retire, in fact, 5 years earlier than he actually planned retiring, and he was financially fit, but you looked at so many other parts of his life, we did not recognize specifically his mental, emotional, spiritual health or physical, right? That was the big one for him. He had a very active job. I mean, he was in manufacturing. He was up on his feet all day long. He was moving around, interacting with people. There's so many things in his day that created physical movement. When he just stopped, his body stopped too.
Well, you said in the book that after 3 years after retirement, 3 months after he retired, he looked actually 3 years older, not 3 months. And he was only 62 at the time. So he was relatively young at this time, active man, worked in manufacturing, and immediately started to age quickly because that activity was taken away from him. And on top of that, let's go back to the positive self-talk episode a couple of episodes ago, where we talked about how if you get an idea in your head, it actually starts to manifest physically in our body. So again, once somebody gets to retirement, they start accepting the idea that they're old, and they start having older thoughts. And that will actually be detrimental to your physical body. So again, going back to this idea with your example of Jim, it really was the perfect storm. It took away his guardrails of movement, and also too probably instilled some ideas in his head that he's getting older now. Again, I'm retired, so I'm old, because that's what society tells us, which is not true, but that's what society tells us, and it accelerates the aging process quicker than what it needs to happen.
Yeah, sometimes I didn't know that was the message I was sending him by retiring, but I think sometimes we do that. We do that to people that are like, oh, it's time for you to move into an assisted living. It's time for you to maybe move into, let's get the laundry out of the basement. Let's move it upstairs. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. Okay, I'm not saying it. Many times in life, in fact, I'm walking with several clients today that are having the same issue. They're walking with their parents that are moving from their homes to assisted living, or they're aging, right? And you're doing what you know is best for them, and actually like moving out of the basement, moving so you don't have people going up and down stairs at that age. Important for health, but you have to realize and recognize what that's telling them, but also realize and recognize what that's doing to your physical health. Right. So replace that exercise. Say, okay, Mom, Dad, if we're moving the laundry upstairs, and that was part of your physical fitness regimen where you're going up and down the stairs, we have to replace that with something else.
Sure. Yeah, there's got to be some movement in your day, because, again, your body was created to move. I always think of the book Blue Zones by Dan Buettner. We've mentioned him a number of times. I highly recommend the book. It's a great book. It's a non-Christian book, but really Dan Buettner does this really cool study about 20 years ago where he finds these people who have these insane longevities, these people that are consistently living over 100 years old. And he found several pockets of these people all over the world, studied them, and he admits in the books he was looking for like one magic. What is the one thing that they're all doing? He actually found 9, and he explains this in his book called Blue Zones. One of the 9 was people move naturally. These people who are 70, 80, 90 years old, still walking, still hiking, still biking, still gardening. They're not going to the gym. They're just moving naturally. And I think this goes back to the point that God created our bodies to move. We can't retire and then go sedentary and sit. That is so bad for us.
Yeah, I think about, I had a stand-up desk in my office here a few years ago, and that was because I started just thinking through, when God made me, a couple things. He didn't necessarily make me to sit down at an office. Let's think about that. Should I be staring at a screen all day long? I don't think it was originally part of it. But I think it's important work we do today, and obviously work changes over time. Mm-hmm. But we have to realize, God made you to move. Yep. He gave you legs. He gave you arms. If you're able to get up and walk. Yep. If you physically are blessed with the ability to move. Then move. Yep. And this is speaking to myself. Another show, Jared, where I'm being convicted because I struggle with that even now. It's like the minimal amount of exercise I'm getting in my day in the last several months, and it's winter now in Minnesota and it's getting colder. So I have to remember that myself. Yep. And for our retired listeners, people that are retired or looking at retirement, just keep in mind, right? God made you in a way to move, and it doesn't mean you have to exercise excessively. In fact, don't just start cold turkey and start exercising. Don't do that. But we do want to make sure people are hearing and remembering that you have to move.
Now, our second point here today is focus less on exercise and just what you said, focus more on activity and moving. I think of a guy, and I've watched him a number of times online, and maybe you've heard of him listening at home. It's Dr. Peter Attia. And if you ever watch him, he's really good speaker, has really good videos, but this guy is like super science nerdy. Like he's talking about fat oxidation and VO2 max, and immediately he loses me. But he talks a lot about zone 2 exercise. And zone 2, if you're familiar with any type of heart rate monitoring or anything, I think we have like 4 or 5 zones, and we talk about like, let's do some high intensity stuff and get our heart rate into zone 4 or 5. And here's the bottom line. When you get older, like pumping your heart rate way up into zones 3, 4, and 5, probably not recommended. But he talks a lot about the importance of zone 2, which is basically kind of the upper end of now I'm starting to work a little bit. And he describes zone 2 exercise as exercising at a level where you can carry on a conversation, but it feels a little bit strained. He says that like if you were on the phone with somebody and you were talking to them, they would know that you're working out. Like you wouldn't be able to hide the fact that I'm just a little bit strained. And he says that is the best type of exercise. Your body was created to just work in that zone. He says you literally can't overwork too much in that zone because, again, our bodies were literally almost engineered for that. They were designed to work, but not like be sprinting all day, not to be running uphill all day, running marathons. We can do those things, but he's like, the best zone is right there, right around zone 2. So I think that that's an important point for retirees. We're not telling you to go take a CrossFit class. We're just saying, every day, get your heart rate elevated a little bit. Maybe it's a brisk walk. Maybe it's just moving. Again, any type of activity or moving, let's focus less on the gym and just getting our heart rates up a little bit today.
Yeah, I mean, we all can picture that person, right? And I'm going to go like this is typically, if you're looking at retirees, this older man or woman, that's just a goer. Like it seems like they're always moving, always doing something. And yeah, I can picture them like on a brisk walk with somebody, and it's like, yep, you can hear that they're working a little bit because they're able to talk together, but it isn't as if they're on an all-out jog, right? Or they're just busy around their house, and they take a phone call from a kid, and they keep working, right? But yet they're in that zone. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, again, we got to move our bodies. Let's focus less on exercise. It's not about the gym. It's all about movement and activity. We got a couple of minutes left, and we want to wrap up at this point, kind of bring it full circle here with being repurposed. I think people need to, again, it's not about getting up and spending an hour at the gym. You can do that. But I think it's really about engineering your schedule in such a way, and we've talked about this already. We engineer gratitude into our day. We engineer reflection into our day. We need to engineer movement into our day, but almost take it up a level and start talking about bigger things as well.
Yeah, it's about recreating those guardrails we talked about. It's about recreating structure that allows your body to get moving. So a lot of people do this in the morning. I'm not a big morning guy. You are, I know that, but I tend to just, hey, there's times in my day where I need to focus on getting up and moving. If I'm a retiree today, and I don't have work to do that, I have to specifically set those habits that say every morning or every whatever time my body will get used to this, and it will be part of my daily routine.
Well, let's go back to that. You mentioned I'm a morning person. I actually do. I enjoy starting the day with activity. In fact, my morning habit / routine is I have to move or get activity. And maybe that means go to the gym. Maybe it doesn't. But I have to have activity before breakfast. That's kind of my mantra. But here's the deal, Ben. I never was a morning person. That was a habit I had to create because actually I moved and I wanted to change gyms and I wanted to get my workout done before work. And I'm not a morning person, haven't been. I am now, but that was a habit that I had to just kind of pound my body into doing it. And now I'm just up. Like I just wake up at 5:30, and whether it's winter or summer, I'm usually on my bike, riding bike to the gym, but that's what works for me. That's how my body's engineered. I know that about myself, but again, that is a habit that I've had to kind of work into my schedule.
Yeah, and that's, I don't have that right now, but I think I could get it. And I think for many listeners today, hear that message of you may today be sitting there like, I'm so far behind. Either I retired already and my body's already slipping. Just make a small incremental change. Make a commitment. I love commitments. We talk about that Repurposed University. Make a commitment that every day within my day, I'm going to do this. Don't set a goal of running a marathon. Set a goal of eating an apple every day for your diet. Set a goal of making more activity in your day, bringing those habits back into your life.
We've got about 30 seconds left here. Let's talk about the purpose side of this, because these two things can go hand in hand.
Yeah, some of those shows are run out of time, Jared. But if I had to say something that's important in our activity and our habits, right? If we can combine the stuff we're talking about, the movement in our day with something with others. Remember, we're not created to be in isolation. So if you can combine it, both you get somebody that gives you support to get you up and moving. So now there's 2 of you or 3 of you that all can come together and do something. But you can also be in relationship with others. I think if you can add those 2 things, you bring a habit of exercise and then exercise of some kind, just moving your body with others. I think that'll greatly improve your life.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation on retirement habits and moving your body. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.